Hello, this is Gunsmith Joe again. We're still talking about BM-59s. We'll go over here and look at the federal ordnance kit. There's been some questions on the web about this and some misinformation. One of the things that's been on the web is the barrels that were sold back in the 60s and 70s. And what federal ordnance did, National Ordnance, Alpine, and Santa Fe, they would take a back end of a gram barrel. This is a demilled one. They take this section of a gram barrel and they bore it out all the way back through the chamber area. Then they take a front end of a 1903 barrel and would turn it down the rear and press fit those into the stub of the gram barrel and braze them on and make one barrel. And then they take the front end and mill it out to take the grand gas cylinder and then would thread it for the gas cylinder lock and turn it down so the front band would have a shoulder to sit on. So if you run across any of the barrels that have two grooves, they're probably 1903 barrels that have been put into a grand back end barrel stub. And they did do 4-groove 1903 barrels too. And later on, intermediate in between, they did mill out some gram barrels, tanker configuration barrels from new barrel stock. So you don't know what you're going to run into when you're buying a BM-59 clone. It was a BM-59 clone that was built back in the 60s or 70s, but that gives you a little bit more information on it. And same thing on the trigger housings. They were mainly all grand trigger housings that were cut out and modified to take the magazine and the original BM-59 magazine catch. This is one that I think I did years ago, but all the builders of BM-59s usually just use grand trigger housings. You'll know original Beretta trigger housing because it'll have the, if it's a GI surplus from U.S. inventory, they milled off the manufacturer numbers and the part numbers on them, and they'd stamp them with PB of some configuration, either PB or PB BM-59, either or, so you know. And then they did make new ones at Beretta that were totally Beretta made. Beretta, used surplus parts on some of their early guns, but later on they were pretty much making all the parts themselves and marking them with Beretta markings. Same way on the receivers. Those two American styles I showed you earlier, they're re-welds, and you can see this is milled out and cut for the Beretta magazine. Even before they welded them back together, they'd do that modification, drill a hole for the clip charger guide, which it fits in that hole like that, and you weld it in. And that's the part that's missing on these kits nowadays, and until somebody starts making these again in quantity, they're just not available. I have just a handful left myself of both the clip charger guide and the bullet guide. Now, you heard some discussions about, well, whether you need to anneal them and normalize the receiver so it's easy to mill with just regular mill cutters, and not having to use a carbide mill cutter. The story is on the gram receivers, they have a case hardening on them, where it goes down a couple thousandths of an inch into the it's mainly a surface hardness, and it only goes down a couple thousandths of an inch into the metal itself. And they're fairly hard. They're supposed to be about 57, 55, 57 on the Rockwell scale of hardness. If you're going to re-weld a receiver, you need to normalize it or anneal it first, and then do all your work on it, and then reheat treat it to where it comes out with that hardness, where you could have too soft a receiver, which will prematurely wear everything, especially on the rail here where the op rod rides. The op rod rides in this rail here, and if it's not hardened properly, it'll wear out where the op rods will pop out while you're shooting it. There's no shortcuts when it comes to re-welding. You can either do it correctly or you can end up with something that's very dangerous. If you do it correctly, a re-weld receiver done properly, you can barely tell it's a re-weld, and the strength is virtually the same as a new receiver. If you do it improperly, you're probably better off just hanging it on the wall and not shooting it. Nowadays they mill them out with carbine cutters, so they don't anneal them and they don't have to reheat treat them. But you got to remember, anytime you're taking more than a couple thousandths off any part of the receiver, you're cutting down into that softer material, and you're losing your surface hardness. In non-stressed areas where you're doing most of your modification, it doesn't really matter. But when you're dealing with your bolt locking lugs or your op rod guide slot there, hardness does matter. And especially on your sight cuts here, if it's not hardened, these will wear out on you, and then you lose your elevation, tension, and adjustment there, and it'll just flop around. So that's just something, you don't see much re-welding going on anymore, but that's something that they did back then, and people are scared of, excuse me, people are scared of re-welded receivers, but if you want to be sure when you have an old re-weld, just go down to a heat treating place, an industrial heat treating place, and they have testers where they can test the hardness throughout the receiver. As long as it's somewhere between 52 to 57 on the Rockwell scale, it's hard enough for durability and function. And same way of taking a GI, this is a GI Grand receiver. Taking a Grand receiver and modifying it, you can do all the cuts in here, whether you're going with the American style or the using original Beretta parts. You can do that without reheat treating it. It's a non-stress area, but don't get into any area where your bolts are locking up, where you have operating parts. They're meant to wear against each other at a certain amount. Don't do that without making sure that you're not affecting the case hardening on the receiver. It can be dangerous. The receivers I'm seeing people modify today, they're cast receivers, investment cast receivers, and most of the people doing them today know all this, so they're done well, and they're correct hardness and everything, so you don't have to worry about it. As far as, we've already talked about some of these other parts. As far as any questions anybody might have, they can email Alpha One's website and ask those questions, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible through one of the Max, one of the sales help here. He's the one that does all the computer stuff, so you'll be talking to me through him, and it's no problem. If you have any questions, just ask him. We'll get back to you eventually. Don't expect an immediate answer, but I'll try to answer all questions that are sent to me. And another thing, there's various bayonets that were issued or made throughout the years for the BM-59 original. Excuse me. You have bayonets on the market now that are for the standard configuration BM-59 with the non-detachable flash hider, and it takes a carbine style back end locking mechanism with a larger ring on front to clear the tri-confiscator. It's basically a modified carbine M1 carbine bayonet. Now, This banet's kind of unique because the paratrooper model, because you have a little bit different length from the bayonet lug to the end of the tri-compensator. You have to have a shorter handled bayonet for this to fit on there correctly. You can see it fits on about like that on the Alpine one, just right at the front. If you put it on this one, it's all the way back to where the tri-compensator holes are to help control the muzzle rise. Kind of blocks the one set of those holes. And the same thing here, if you try to put a regular length BM-59 bayonet on the Alpine model, or not the Alpine model, but the paratrooper model, the ring will be right here. You won't really engage it, so they're really not interchangeable. So far, these type of bayonets haven't really materialized on the commercial market, maybe someday. So it makes a pretty rare bayonet right now, but has M16 style modified grips, and that's the only one that'll fit on the Alpine model, or the paratrooper model. And speaking of the Alpine, the only difference between the standard BM-59 issued rifle and the Alpine was folding stock. Everything else was the same, it just had a folding stock that it fit into. They call that the Alpine model. Of course, this one is a Reese manufactured stock, but yeah, the originals had the Beretta stock, which is a little bit more complex than what the Reese family came up with later when they ran out of these parts. If you find an Alpine stock that's marked on the inside SLI, which is S-I-L-E, those were imported back in the 70s, brand new from Beretta, and sold out of a company in New York. And that's the reason that stamping will be on the inside of the barrel channel, is it's an importer stamping. Just little tidbits I picked up over the years, buying, selling, collecting these BM-59 style rifles. This bayonet here on this one, they made these up so they would clear some of the early tri-compensators. They'll also clear the T-37 type flash hider, which we used on the M1C sniper rifle. This is one that I modified by just cutting it at a slant. So I don't know if any of the audience has ever fired a Grand rifle with the regular T-38 flash hider, but when your bullet exits the flash hider, it has a tendency to peen like a tuning fork. So if you cut them in a slant there or halfway back, it eliminates that ping when you shoot it. And this bayonet is basically just a cut down Garand bayonet. It has a larger ring on it, so clearly either the early muzzle brakes or the T-37 type flash hider. Same thing with this bayonet. It was made up just like the modified M1 Garand bayonet, which evolved from the 1903 bayonet. It has a slightly larger hole, so it would clear the M14 style flash hider assembly that was put on some of these BM-59 clones in decades ago. Basically just a modified Garand bayonet. Some of the flash hiders, tri-compensators that Beretta sold had a lug on here that wasn't carbine configuration, it was a Garand configuration, and it used a bayonet like this, or the late model M5 Garand bayonet with a larger ring on it so it would slide over the tri-compensator grenade launcher. And there's been questions on the bayonets, and even bayonet collectors have problems identifying these bayonets because they look like a Garand bayonet, but they're not. And I think I covered the magazines a little bit earlier in the segment, but here's another little tidbit on the magazines. It might be kind of hard to see it, but when you have an early Beretta magazine, It'll be marked on the floor plate with the Petro Beretta markings, and then made in Italy. You have a later model magazine, it'll just be marked BM-59. Basically, the only difference between the earlier model magazines and the later model magazines is just the stampings on them. And as far as the original Beretta magazines, they always had the full lips on the feed lips on them, where when you had an unmodified grand bolt, you just ground off the edges of them so the grand bolt would slide through it. It'll work in either gun on this one, but this one will not work in an unmodified grand bolt in a BM-59 type rifle. So if you see these at gun shows or garage sales or wherever, you might pick up a used one and you see these ground lips. That's the story on those. One thing about the BM-59 magazine, it's one of the best made magazines ever designed. It's heat treated very hard. I used to demonstrate these in gun shows. I'd throw them against the concrete floor right on the feed lips, and it would scratch the concrete before it bend the lips. They're very well made, heat treated, very hard, and I don't think you'd ever wear one out. You might have to replace the mag spring every once in a while if you leave it fully loaded for years, but outside of that, you don't really need 100 magazines. One will last your lifetime, but that doesn't help magazine sales. I hope that answered a few questions. I'll try to get back with a little bit more in the next video.